The Queen's disrespect for humans. Queen Zelana sat on her high throne, her golden robes shining under the bright lights of the royal hall. Her deep purple eyes scanned the warriors standing before her, strong, tall, and battle-hardened. They were the finest soldiers of the Xelarian Empire, the most powerful force in the galaxy. But among them stood one outsider, a human. Captain Ryan Carter stood tall, his posture straight despite the sharp gazes and whispers around him. He was a soldier from Earth, sent as a representative to prove that humans could be valuable warriors. But it was clear from the way the Queen looked at him that she did not believe in his worth. Zelana leaned forward, resting her chin on her fist. "So this is what humanity has to offer," she said, her voice smooth but cold. "I was expecting something more impressive." Laughter rippled through the Xelarian warriors. Commander Valor, her most trusted general, smirked. "With respect, my queen, humans are fragile creatures. They are slow, weak, and their lifespans are too short. They should stick to their own little wars." The warriors laughed again, nodding in agreement. Ryan clenched his fists but did not react. He had faced worse than this. Insults did not bother him. He had come to prove himself, not argue. Queen Zelana tilted her head. "Tell me, Captain Carter, why should I allow a human into my forces?" Ryan met her gaze. "Because humans are survivors. We don't give up, even when the odds are against us." Zelana raised an eyebrow. "Survivors? How amusing." She turned to Valor. "Tell me, Commander, what happened the last time humans fought against Xelarians?" Valor grinned. "They lost. Miserably." Another wave of laughter. Ryan remained still, his face unreadable. "That was years ago," he said. "You fought weak politicians and scared soldiers. I'm not them." Zelana smirked. "Bold words. But words do not win battles, Captain Carter." She waved a hand dismissively. "I have no use for humans in my army." Ryan felt frustration build inside him, but before he could respond, the hall suddenly shook. A deep, thunderous sound rumbled through the palace walls. A second later, the alarms blared. The Queen's eyes narrowed. "What is happening?" A guard rushed in, his face pale. "My Queen, we are under attack." Zelana shot to her feet. "Impossible. No one would dare." Before she could finish, a huge explosion rocked the palace. The glass windows shattered. The warriors grabbed their weapons, their expressions turning serious. Then the doors burst open. A group of dark armored invaders stormed inside, weapons raised. Their leader, a towering alien with glowing red eyes, stepped forward. His voice was a growl. "The Queen dies tonight." The Xelarian warriors rushed to defend their ruler, but the invaders moved faster, stronger, deadlier than anyone expected. The Queen's guards fell one by one. The enemy was too well prepared. Zelana's breath caught as she realized something terrifying. They weren't here for a battle. They were here for an execution. She stepped back, reaching for her weapon. But the enemy leader lunged at her, his blade aimed straight for her heart. Time seemed to slow. Zelana braced for the attack, but it never came. Because at the last second, Ryan moved. With lightning-fast reflexes, he grabbed a fallen guard's weapon, dived in front of the Queen, and blocked the strike with a powerful counterattack. The enemy leader stumbled back, surprised. The Queen gasped, staring at the human who had just saved her life. Ryan didn't stop. He fought with brutal efficiency, taking down enemy after enemy. He moved differently from Xelarians. Unpredictable, relentless. He dodged, countered, struck with precise, deadly force. Within moments, the invaders lay defeated at his feet. Silence filled the hall. Zelana's warriors, who had mocked him minutes ago, now stared at him in shock. The Queen slowly straightened, regaining her composure. She looked at Ryan, her expression unreadable. He stood before her, his weapon still dripping with enemy blood. He wasn't breathing hard. He wasn't afraid. For the first time in her life, Queen Zelana had no words. Ryan met her gaze, his voice calm. Still think humans are weak. Ryan saves the queen. But she's still stubborn. The throne room was a mess. The once pristine floors were stained with blood, and the air smelled of smoke and scorched metal. The attack had been swift, brutal. Bodies of the fallen, both Silurian warriors and enemy assassins, lay scattered across the grand hall. And in the center of it all stood Ryan Carter, his weapon still dripping with enemy blood. He had just saved Queen Zelana's life. The queen slowly turned, her golden robe torn, her breath unsteady. She was the ruler of the most powerful empire in the galaxy. She had never needed saving before. Yet here she was, alive only because of a human. Her deep purple eyes locked onto Ryan, studying him like a puzzle she couldn't solve. His breathing was steady, his grip on the weapon firm. He had fought like a predator, not prey. The silence in the throne room stretched. The surviving Silurian warriors shifted uncomfortably. None of them had moved fast enough to protect their queen. Only the human had. Finally, Zelana's voice cut through the quiet. Cold, sharp, unforgiving. Step away from me. Ryan frowned but didn't argue. He lowered his weapon and took a step back. Commander Vaylor stormed forward, his expression twisted with rage and humiliation. This is an insult. He spat. How dare a human lay hands on our queen? Ryan raised an eyebrow. I was saving her life. Vaylor's fists clenched. A true Silurian warrior would have done that without your help. Ryan's gaze flickered to the bodies of the dead Silurian warriors lying around them. He said nothing, but the message was clear. None of them had. Vaylor's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being silenced without a word. Queen Zelana turned away from Ryan, adjusting her torn robes as if the attack had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. She refused to acknowledge what had just happened. There was a traitor, Ryan said, his voice calm but firm. That was an inside job. The queen's gaze snapped back to him. You assume much, human. Ryan folded his arms. Then explain how they got past your security, how they knew exactly when and where to strike. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in her eyes. Ryan had seen this kind of attack before, back on Earth, in special ops missions where the enemy always had inside help. This was no different. Zelana hated to admit it, but he was right. The queen turned to her surviving guards. Lock down the palace. No one leaves until we find the traitor. Vaylor stepped forward. My queen, you cannot truly be listening to. She raised a hand, silencing him. Enough. Her voice was sharp as a blade. She turned back to Ryan, her expression unreadable. You're a soldier, yes. Ryan nodded. Her fingers tightened into fists. She hated this, hated that she was about to ask for help from a human. But she couldn't ignore the truth. You will investigate this. Find the traitor. Her jaw clenched as she added, you may stay. Until this is done. A murmur ran through the room. The queen had just given a human authority over an imperial matter. Vaylor looked ready to explode, but he didn't dare defy her order. Ryan smirked. Guess I'm not so useless after all. Queen Zelana's eyes flashed with irritation, but she turned and walked away. Ryan watched her go, knowing one thing for certain. This wasn't over yet. Forced to work together, the palace felt different after the attack. The air was thick with tension, and the once proud warriors of the Silurian Empire whispered in hushed voices. Somewhere within these grand halls, a traitor lurked, someone who had sold out their own queen. Ryan Carter stood in the center of it all, an outsider in a nest of distrust. Silurians did not respect humans, but they feared traitors even more. Queen Zelana sat on her throne, her expression like carved stone. She had barely acknowledged Ryan since the attack, but now she had no choice but to listen. He stood before her, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room like a soldier assessing a battlefield. You were the target, Ryan said, his voice calm but firm. That means the traitor is someone close to you, someone who knew your schedule. Your security codes. The warriors shifted uneasily. No one wanted to hear it, but they all knew he was right. Commander Vaylor sneered. And I suppose you think you're the one to find them. Ryan met his glare without hesitation. I don't think. I know. A tense silence fell over the room. Queen Zaylana exhaled slowly, her fingers drumming against the armrest of her throne. She hated this, hated that she had to rely on a human. But she hated the thought of an enemy within her own palace even more. Very well, she said at last. You have my permission to investigate. Ryan didn't wait for gratitude. He knew he wouldn't get any. I need full access to your security reports, your guard rotations, and any strange behavior from your inner circle. Vaylor laughed bitterly. You think we'll just hand over classified information to a human? Ryan stepped forward, his voice low and sharp. I just saved your queen's life. If you don't trust me, maybe you're the traitor. The room froze. Vaylor's fist tightened on his blade. Careful, human, he growled. Ryan didn't back down. He never backed down. Queen Zaylana sighed, rubbing her temples. Enough. She looked at Ryan with unreadable eyes. You will have what you need, but do not mistake this for trust. You are here for one reason only, to prove your usefulness. Ryan smirked. That's all I need. The investigation begins. Ryan wasted no time. He pored over security footage, scanned through guard logs, and questioned palace staff. Every Xelarian he spoke to looked at him with suspicion, but none dared refuse his questions. The pieces didn't add up. There were no signs of forced entry, which meant the assassins had been let in. The attack had happened at the exact moment the guard patrols were thinnest, which meant the enemy had inside knowledge. And then Ryan found it. An erased security log. Someone had tampered with the system, deleting the single record from the night before the attack. Someone covering their tracks. Ryan's instincts kicked in. He was getting close. The enemy strikes again. That night, Ryan moved through the darkened palace halls. Something wasn't right. His gut told him he was being watched. Then, a whisper of movement. Ryan spun just in time to block the attack. A dagger slashed through the air, missing his throat by inches. Ryan grabbed his attacker's wrist, twisting hard. The assassin hissed in pain but didn't cry out. Trained. Professional. Ryan slammed him against the wall, pinning him down. For the first time, he got a look at the enemy's face, and his blood went cold. It was a palace guard. One of Zaylana's own men. Ryan narrowed his eyes. So, you're the one who let them in. The guard struggled, his teeth bared. You don't understand, human. You don't know what's coming. Ryan pressed the dagger against his throat. Then tell me. The guard smirked. You're already too late. A second later, he bit down on something in his mouth. A poison capsule. Ryan cursed as the traitor collapsed, dead within seconds. He wasn't working alone. The real mastermind was still out there. And if the traitor's last words were true, another attack was coming. Betrayal and capture. The traitor was dead, but the real enemy was still out there. Ryan Carter paced the Queen's war room, his fists clenched. The assassin's last words echoed in his mind. You're already too late. Too late for what? The Xelarian commanders stood in a circle, their expressions cold and unreadable. The Queen sat at the head of the table, her fingers lightly tapping against the armrest. Ryan knew that sound now. She was thinking, calculating, but time wasn't on their side. The traitor didn't act alone, Ryan said, his voice steady. He was covering for someone higher up, someone who planned the first attack and is still inside this palace. Commander Vaylor scoffed. Convenient that the only person who knew anything conveniently died before speaking. His eyes narrowed. And who was the last person to see him alive? Oh yes, the human. Ryan's jaw tightened. He had expected this. They would rather blame him than admit their own people were compromised. But Queen Zaylana raised a hand. Enough, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. Valor shut his mouth, but his glare didn't fade. The queen turned her gaze to Ryan. Sharp. Measuring. "You believe another attack is coming," she said. It wasn't a question. Ryan nodded. "Yes. And we need to move before they do." The queen tilted her head slightly, studying him. Then, after a moment, she stood. "No." Ryan blinked. "No." Zelana's gaze swept the room, her voice commanding. "We will not act in fear. We will not let a human dictate how we protect our empire." Ryan stared at her in disbelief. "This isn't about pride." She stepped closer. "Everything is about pride, Captain Carter." Ryan exhaled sharply. She still didn't get it. And then, boom, the walls shook violently. The war room lights flickered, alarms blaring through the palace. A second later, a deafening explosion ripped through the halls. The attack had already begun. The fall of the palace. The room erupted into chaos. Guards rushed in, weapons drawn. The Exilarian commanders shouted orders, their voices drowned out by the sound of crumbling walls. Ryan's instincts kicked in. He grabbed the queen's wrist. "We need to move. Now." For once, she didn't argue. They ran. Flames licked at the palace walls. The golden halls now darkened with smoke. Explosions rippled through the structure, tearing apart what had once been an impenetrable fortress. This wasn't just an attack. This was an invasion. Ryan shoved a fallen guard out of the way, dragging Zelana forward. Behind them, her warriors fought. But they were losing. The enemy was already inside. They turned a corner and froze. A squad of heavily armored soldiers stood in their path, weapons raised. Ryan reached for his sidearm, but the enemy was faster. A sharp crack filled the air. Pain exploded through Ryan's body as a shock round slammed into his chest. He collapsed, his limbs locking up from the electrical charge. He tried to move, tried to fight, but his body refused. His vision blurred as he saw the queen standing alone. "Get away from her," he tried to growl, but the words barely left his lips. The enemy commander stepped forward. He was massive, his armor dark and jagged. A familiar voice rumbled from beneath his helmet. "You should have left when you had the chance, human." Ryan's heart sank. Commander Valor. Betrayal hit him harder than the shock round. Valor smirked, stepping past Ryan's fallen body. "The queen belongs to me now." Zelana's eyes burned with fury. "You traitoress." Valor raised a hand. A second shock round fired. Zelana staggered, her body convulsing as the charge took hold. Ryan fought to stay conscious, but his vision darkened. The last thing he saw was Valor kneeling beside the fallen queen, whispering something in her ear. Then everything went black. The human who refuses to die. Pain. It was the first thing Ryan Carter felt as consciousness slowly returned. A dull burning ache spread through his body, his muscles still stiff from the shock round. His head throbbed. His arms felt heavy. Something cold and metallic dug into his wrists. Restraints. He forced his eyes open. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of metal and fuel. The walls around him hummed with energy, the dull blue glow of an alien power source flickering overhead. A prison cell. And across from him, chained to the opposite wall, sat Queen Zelana. Her golden robes were torn, her silver cuffs locked tightly around her wrists. But even bound, even bruised, she still held herself like a ruler, spine straight, eyes burning with fury. Ryan groaned as he tried to move. His restraints tightened, sending a sharp jolt through his wrists. Zelana's gaze flickered to him. For the first time, she looked at him differently. Not with disdain, not with amusement, but with something else. Something like respect. "You're awake," she murmured. Ryan smirked, despite the pain. "Yeah, lucky me." The queen's eyes darkened. "I was starting to think you wouldn't survive." Ryan shifted in his restraints, testing them. "I don't die that easy." A voice interrupted them. Cold. Amused. Familiar. No, you don't. The cell door hissed open, and Commander Vaylor stepped inside. He was out of his royal armor now, dressed in the dark combat uniform of the enemy. His sharp violet eyes gleamed as he studied them both. Ryan tensed. Betrayal still burned in his chest. Queen Zaylana, however, was calm, controlled, but Ryan could see it, the way her fingers curled into fists, the way her jaw clenched just slightly. She hated him. Why? Zaylana's voice was icy, but steady. You had power, my trust. Why throw it away? Vaylor smirked. Because you're weak. Ryan gritted his teeth. Vaylor stepped closer, circling them like a predator. You think I don't see it? The way the High Council doubts you. The way they whisper behind your back. His gaze flickered to Ryan. You even let a human save you. How pathetic. Zaylana's expression didn't waver, but Ryan saw it. The slight flicker of her eye, the way her breath hitched just once. Vaylor smiled. He could see it too. I struck a deal, he continued, with the Syndicate. They have real warriors, not soft rulers clinging to old traditions, not pathetic earthlings pretending to be strong. Ryan's jaw clenched. He had no weapon, no way to fight back. But that didn't mean he wouldn't try. Vaylor knelt in front of Zaylana, his smirk widening. They wanted you alive. For now. He reached out and grabbed her chin, tilting her face toward him. But that can change. Ryan moved. Fast. Faster than Vaylor expected. He lunged, pulling against his restraints with all his strength. The energy cuffs burned against his skin, but he didn't care. His boot slammed into Vaylor's side, sending the traitor crashing to the floor. For a split second, the room was silent. Then Vaylor snarled, pushing himself up. You little. Ryan didn't let him finish. He swung his legs again, this time wrapping his ankles around Vaylor's throat. A trained chokehold. Military precision. Vaylor gasped, his hand scrambling to pry Ryan off. Zaylana moved in that instant. Fast. Deadly. Despite her restraints, she twisted just enough to slam her knee into Vaylor's ribs. A crack. A sharp inhale. Vaylor stumbled back, coughing. His hand flew to his side. A communicator. Before Ryan could react, Vaylor pressed the button. An alarm blared through the ship. Heavy boots echoed down the hall. Reinforcements were coming. Vaylor grinned, wiping blood from his mouth. You should have stayed unconscious, Carter. Ryan growled, pulling at his restraints again, but this time the energy cuffs didn't hold. They sparked, flickered, and shut off. Zaylana's eyes widened. How? Ryan grinned. Human trick. Vaylor's face twisted with rage. Ryan didn't give him a chance to react. He tackled him. Both men crashed to the ground, fists flying. Zaylana struggled against her bonds, frustration flashing in her gaze. Ryan, she shouted. More guards were coming. Ryan knew he couldn't win this fight alone. He needed to free her. Vaylor snarled, swinging his fist, but Ryan dodged, slamming his elbow into the traitor's temple. Then, in one swift move, he grabbed Vaylor's fallen blade. Turned. Slashed. The cuffs on Zaylana's wrists snapped open. For a single, charged moment, she stared at him. Ryan tossed her the blade. Fight's not over yet, Your Majesty. A slow smile spread across her lips. The Queen rose to her feet. And then, hell broke loose. The final stand. The moment Queen Zaylana's restraints fell away, the air shifted. She was no longer a captive. She was no longer a ruler in chains. She was a warrior, and her vengeance was about to begin. The Xylarian Queen caught the blade Ryan had tossed her without hesitation. Fluid. Perfect. Deadly. Her violet eyes burned like twin stars as she turned toward the traitor. Commander Vaylor, the man who had betrayed her, the man who had nearly ended her reign. He was hers now. But first, the reinforcements arrived. The heavy doors at the end of the prison hall slammed open, and a dozen armored guards stormed in, weapons raised. For a second, the scene froze. Ryan Carter, bruised and bloodied, stood with his fists clenched, breathing hard. His body ached, but his mind was sharp. Queen Zelana, now free, stood beside him, her blade gleaming in the dim light, her stance unshakable. And Valor stumbled to his feet, blood trickling from his temple, his rage turning into something else. Fear. Then, chaos exploded. The first guard lunged, but Zelana was faster. She twisted like a predator in motion, her blade flashing as she cut through armor and flesh in one lethal strike. Ryan moved in sync with her, grabbing a fallen enemy's weapon and firing two perfect shots. One to the chest, one to the throat. The hallway erupted into battle. The queen danced between enemies, her blade cutting through them with effortless precision. Ryan fought beside her, using brute force, speed, and pure human resilience to dodge, counter, and kill. For the first time, they weren't fighting each other. They were fighting together. And they were winning. The final duel, Ryan versus Valor. Bodies littered the floor. Smoke and blood filled the air. The alarm still blared in the background, but only 3 people remained standing. Ryan, Zelana, Valor. The traitor staggered back, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. His men were dead. His betrayal had failed. Yet, even now, he refused to surrender. "You think this changes anything?" Valor growled. "You think you've won." Ryan wiped blood from his lip and smirked. "I think I've kicked your ass twice now." Valor roared and lunged. Ryan met him head-on. Their blades clashed, sparks flying. Valor was stronger, but Ryan was smarter. He dodged, countered, struck faster than the Exilarian expected. But Valor was desperate. He feinted, then drove his elbow into Ryan's ribs. A sharp, brutal strike. Ryan grunted, pain flaring through his side. For a moment, it looked like Valor had the upper hand. Until Zelana stepped forward. In one swift motion, she drove her blade straight through Valor's back. The traitor's body froze. His eyes widened in shock. Zelana leaned in, whispering into his ear, "You underestimated humans." Then, with a sharp twist, she pulled the blade free. Valor collapsed, his body hitting the floor with a dull thud. Silence filled the room. Ryan panted, looking down at the fallen commander. "Remind me not to piss you off," he muttered. Zelana turned to him. For the first time, she smiled. Not out of mockery, not out of amusement, but real admiration. Ryan had proven himself, and for the first time in her life, Queen Zelana knew she would never dismiss a human again. The Queen's new champion. The battle was over. Smoke still curled from the wreckage of the ship. The scent of blood, metal, and fire filled the air. The lifeless body of Commander Valor lay at Queen Zelana's feet, his betrayal ending in the very failure he had sworn wouldn't happen. But the war was far from over. Ryan Carter exhaled slowly, wiping the streak of blood from his forehead. His body ached, every muscle screaming in protest, but he was still standing. That was enough. He glanced at the Queen. Zelana was unharmed, but something about her had changed. The arrogance, the cold superiority, it was gone. She stood stronger, prouder, her blade still dripping with the blood of her fallen enemies. For the first time, she wasn't just a ruler. She was a warrior. And she was looking at him like he was one too. A tense silence stretched between them. Then, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridors. Silurian royal guards. Their armor gleamed under the flickering emergency lights as they rushed in, weapons raised, only to freeze when they saw the scene before them. Their queen stood alive and victorious. Their once trusted commander, Valor, lay dead and disgraced. And beside the queen, a human stood, unbroken. A murmur spread through the guards, confusion flashing in their glowing eyes. They had expected a rescue mission. Instead, they found a human standing at the Queen's side. Ryan turned to Zelana. "I'm guessing they're either here to arrest me or crown me." Her lips curled into a smirk. "Let's find out." The coronation of a warrior. The Exilarian throne room had never been this quiet before. The entire empire had gathered. Commanders, nobles, warriors, even the High Council, the shadowy figures who had whispered doubts about their queen, stood in uneasy silence. Zelana sat on her golden throne, dressed in ceremonial armor, her violet eyes sweeping across the sea of faces. But today, she wasn't the center of attention. The human standing at the foot of the throne was Ryan Carter, scared, battle-worn, and still standing. The same human she had once dismissed as fragile, weak, unworthy. Now he was the only warrior she trusted. She rose from her throne, stepping forward. The entire hall watched, breathless, waiting. Then, in a single, deliberate motion, she removed the golden war medal from her own chest and placed it over Ryan's. Gasps rippled through the hall. Ryan glanced at her, brow raised. "This mean I get free drinks?" Zelana smirked. "It means you are now the royal champion of the Exilarian Empire, the highest honor a warrior can receive." Ryan adjusted the medal. "Guess that makes me the first human to ever get one." Zelana's smirk faded slightly. She tilted her head, watching him carefully. "No," she said softly. "It makes you the first human I have ever respected." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Zelana did something that shocked the entire throne room. She stepped closer, too close. Ryan barely had time to react before she leaned in, pressing a soft, fleeting kiss against his cheek. The hall fell into complete silence. Ryan blinked. Zelana pulled back, her expression unreadable. But her eyes burned with something dangerous, powerful, unspoken. "The war isn't over, Ryan Carter," she murmured. "Stay by my side. And together, we'll change the galaxy." Ryan smirked, wasn't planning on leaving anyway. The hall erupted into cheers. And so, the story of the human warrior who had once been dismissed became legend.